We're now, Jason, you're my conscience in every area of my public life at the temple. Thank you very much.
It's good to have such an assistant.
What a responsibility.
It's a lot of pressure, boy.
It's
Oh, boy.
terrifying.
Yeah.
But and at the next board meeting, I'll ask to give you a 20% raise if that's okay with you. All right. So the announcement of our speaker this evening came with a rather long introduction, but that was basically cut in half from what she sent me originally. So I thought I'd read the whole thing so we understand the credentials of the person we're listening to this evening, and then I'm going to turn the floor over to her and her PowerPoint. And speaking of what moving from conscience to technical abilities, I was successfully able to coach her to bring this up on her computer screen. So I'm going to apply for a job as a technician somewhere. In any event, I take great pleasure in introducing to you my friend Hava Tirosh-Samuelson. She graduated from Hebrew University. She's the Regents Professor of History, the Irving and Miriam Lowe Professor of Modern Judaism, and the Director of Jewish Studies at Arizona State University in Tempe, Arizona. You realize any one of those is a full-time job. As a Jewish intellectual historian, she writes on Jewish philosophy and mysticism, religion, science, and technology, Judaism and ecology, and Jewish philosophy and feminism. In addition to over 70 essays and book chapters, she is the author of Between Worlds, The Life and Thought of Rabbi David Ben Judah Messer Leon, Happiness in Pre-Modern Judaism, Virtue, Knowledge, and Well-Being in Pre-Modern Judaism, and Religion and Environment, The Case of Judaism. She is also the editor of 8 volumes, including Judaism and Ecology, Created World and Revealed Word, Women and Gender in Jewish Philosophy for the 21st Century, Personal Reflections, and the Future of Jewish Philosophy. Professor Tirosh-Samuelson is the editor-in-chief of the Library of Contemporary Jewish Philosophers, a series of 21 books that features outstanding Jewish thinkers today. That alone is a magisterial accomplishment. So now you know something about whom we're listening to this evening. Professor Tirosh-Samuelson, please.
All right, so I'm very glad to be with you. We are not so far apart. I'm only in Phoenix. I live in Phoenix. The university is in Tempe. It's all one urban sprawl. And I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about my background, because that's kind of relevant to the conversation we're going to have. I basically am going to use the PowerPoint slides to go along with what I'm saying. So you'll see quite a lot of slides. So as you can see on the screen, I was born in Kibbutz Afikim in Israel. My parents came to Palestine in the 1930s. They were both lovers of nature. My mother, Dora, managed the vegetable gardens in the kibbutz. And my father, Joseph, ran the regional distribution center for auto parts that served all people and their vehicles in a very large region. But he also loved animals. He really was an animal lover, especially horses, and his hobby was fishing. Now, why do I mention that? I mention that because Zionists, as they were kind of interested in the project of creating a new kind of Jews, Jews who are going to be rooted in the soil, Jews whose communal life is grounded in the pursuit of equality and justice. This was what the kibbutz was about. And our particular kibbutz was the home of the labor movement. Kibbutz Afikim was the home of the labor movement, home quote unquote. And many of the kibbutz founders, including my own mother, followed the teachings of David Gold, very important kind of this person who really figured out the relationship to the natural world. So I kind of grew up with that environment, and it's not a surprise that I always found myself kind of attending to issues that we are going to talk about. So I can tell you more about my parents if that's of interest to any of you. But the next point is that I was educated in the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. I'm a Jewish intellectual historian. And my approach to Judaism is always kind of located in time. I don't write as a theologian. I write about theology, but basically an intellectual historian. I started my career by focusing on the medieval and early modern period, roughly from the 10th to the 17th centuries. But in the last 25 years or so, I moved into talking about science and religion, religion and ecology, as you heard Rabbi Cohen telling you about it. So I'm very much part of this kind of discourse, the discourse on religion and ecology that you'll hear more what this is all about. So what am I going to? So here are some of my work. So basically, I started to get into Judaism in ecology in the late 90s. We had a conference in Harvard. It was a very important kind of moment in the late 90s. There was a series of conferences about religion and ecology, and the conference on Judaism and ecology was in 1997. I was asked to edit the volume of the conference. This is this book, Judaism and Ecology, which is still, it came out in 2002, but it is still very much kind of a foundational type work. If you want to get into this conversation, this is the book that you may have. I also wrote a good number afterwards. I wrote a good number of essays and reference books. You have a list here. And this is just to tell you what I'm sharing all this with you, to let you know that there is a discourse, an academic discourse on religion and ecology, and I'm kind of the Jewish voice in it. If you want to know what was done up to 2015, you can read this online. Oxford Bibliographies Online has an essay of mine on Judaism and the environment, and that covers all the work that was done up to this point. Actually, I'm expected now to update this essay, but it's so much work and I haven't been able to get to it. This book here came out of a series of lectures that I gave in 2016 in Goshen College, and it's part of a Science and Religion series. And the place that you see in front of you, you probably recognize, that's the southern part of the Sea of Galilee. And I grew up right south of it, 2 miles south of that point. So that's kind of what I'm doing as far as our topic is concerned. And I've written many more essays on book and kind of book chapters, but I'm not going to bore you with all the details of it. So my take-home message to you is that there's no way to talk about Judaism without talking about nature. So nature is really very central to Jewish religious self-understanding. Judaism, I argue, beginning with the Bible, harbors deep ecological wisdom, and that wisdom is very relevant to our current eco-crisis. And the third point that I want you to take home with you is that contemporary Jewry has responded to climate change through scholarship and activism. So it's not the case that Judaism doesn't have anything to say about those issues. It's not the case that Jews were silent. On the contrary, in many ways, Jews were ahead of the game. And I'll tell you, once we get into it, you'll see what I mean by that. So if you ask me, is Judaism relevant to climate change? I would say the short answer is very much so. If you ask me, what have Jews done about climate change since becoming aware of climate change? I will say that Jews have done a lot. If you ask me, can Judaism help Jews live in a manner that is appropriate to a world impacted by climate change? I will say the short answer is definitely yes. And finally, can Jews do more? And again, the short answer is absolutely. They definitely can do more. So here is the structure of my talk. I will start by saying a few words, most of it will be known to you, about climate change as the face of the eco-crisis. So my point here is that climate change should not be taken apart or should be dealt with separately from the eco-crisis. It's just the way we talk about the eco-crisis by focusing on climate change. That's part one. Part two, I'll speak about various denominational responses to climate change. And in part three, I will kind of articulate some of the principles that I think across the denominational spectrums, all group of Jews basically agree on certain principles. And then I will conclude by looking at Judaism kind of as a religion of hope. That's, of course, a term that comes from Rabbi Sachs. So that's the structure of my point. My argument is that all strands of contemporary Judaism have responded to climate change. And that's really, it starts with reform and it goes through the spectrum of conservative, reconstructionist, orthodox, of course, humanistic Judaism. So everybody's already on board. Judaism has responded to the eco-crisis in general and to climate change in particular by using religious categories. So the response is always framed in a religious idiom. So the terminology is going to be creation, creation in the divine image, covenant, sin, repentance, responsibility, justice. All of those are religious terms. So in my view, any religious congregation, it doesn't really matter which movement you belong to, any religious congregation has all the vocabulary and all the resources to really think through a Judaic response to it, but frame it in religious terminology. In the age of, here I would say Jewish environmentalism goes beyond those responses, and that includes both an academic discourse and grassroots activism. So when I say environmentalism, that's those two dimensions. And Jewish environmentalism, I believe, offer us a certain hope and involvement, and that's much more productive and constructive than just be depressed about it or be cynical about it or be passive about it. So I really think that the Jewish discourse is very hopeful, it's future oriented, and it calls us to action. And today I will end, but you'll see in part three, there are many organizations and initiatives and projects that deal with climate advocacy, but I don't want to reduce the Judaic response just to advocacy. So there's more to here than that. So let's start with part one, climate change as the face of the eco-crisis. So here are just some pictures that you're all familiar with. There's nothing, I'm not going to tell you anything that you don't know. The climate is changing, and we human beings have brought the change. We brought it about by our actions. So the cause of climate change is definitely the greenhouse gases that serve as a thick blanket around the planet, keeping it from becoming an ice ball. Over the millennia, greenhouse gas level ebbed and flowed on their own. But there was definitely a sudden spike in that about 150 years ago when we started burning oil and coal during the Industrial Revolution. As a result, our planetary blanket is now getting a lot thicker, and the world is getting warmer. So the effects of global warming vary. That's a very important point, that we're going to have both warmer weather and colder weather. We're going to record heat waves. We're also going to have record cold snaps. We're going to have floodings, but we also have droughts. We're going to have wet areas and that are going to get wetter, and hot areas that are going to get hotter. So you get the point. It's a mistake to think that it's even. It's not even. It's not evenly distributed. And it affects different regions, different parts of the world in different level. But climate change is manifested in all aspects of the physical world, in the oceans, in the atmosphere, in plants, in animals, in permafrost, and in weather events. Today we experience, and in California experience it more than I here in Arizona, even though we have our problems in the summertime. You just got some serious climate events. So we have extreme weather events, we have devastating storms, we have destructive floodings, we have droughts, we have melting of ice caps, retreats of glacier, rising sea levels, and the list can go on and on. So I don't want to bore you with too many kind of details about it. The facts are quite clear, and nobody can really challenge the facts. And people who are trying to challenge the facts are actually engaged in climate change denial. So it's very clear today that by 2050, the number of climate refugees that we are going to, that the humanity, I won't be here by that time, but humanity will have to deal with is over 1 billion people. By 2070, according to the calculation, 19% of the planet land surface will be uninhabitably hot. Today is only 1%. By 2070, it's going to be almost 20%. The impact of climate change is not evenly distributed. Of course, the poorest countries suffer more, even though they produce fewer, or the fewest even, greenhouse gases. So that raises a whole range of ethical issues. Who is responsible for addressing the social cost of climate change? Who should pay for the cost that higher temperatures bring about? So the issue of responsibility is very, very important. And how can we address the social impact of climate change? So we're going to talk about climate change and social justice issues in part 2 and part 3. But the point is that if we think about climate justice, we get to the point that just scientific information is not enough. We can't deal with climate change merely on scientific data, even though the data is necessary, but it's insufficient to really figure out what we need to do. That's why world religions, and Judaism in particular, frame climate change as a moral issue to which there needs to be a moral response. So this is not new. This is from 2022. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which was signed by 1,300 scientists, issued that statement that you can read on the slide. The scientific evidence is unequivocal. Climate change is a threat to human well-being and the health of the planet. And any further delay in dealing with it, of course, is going to cause more problems. So we definitely are called by scientists. We are called to action. And the call is not new, but we have ignored it for a pretty long time. Now, I want to introduce you to this guy. He's a British climatologist, Mike Hume, even though it's spelled kind of funny, but it's pronounced Hume. So Mike Hume made a very interesting, he has written quite a lot. And if you don't know this book, I highly recommend that you read. This is a 209 book, Why We Disagree About Climate Change. So it's he really makes a point that in order to get into the debates, we need to pay attention to culture, to religion, to ethics, to all of those things that scientists don't really pay attention to. But his interesting new book, this is a more recent book from, I think, 2019, where he says climate change is not everything. So that's also, it's a polemical book. And basically, it's a polemical book against those people who talk about climate as if it's a one-factor problem. And he's saying, no, it's really not a simple problem to which there is a clear or straightforward solution. To think in those reductionist terms is what he calls climatism. So climatism is when we reduce everything to one factor, and we have everything is interpreted through that lens. And he's saying to us, no, don't do that. What you need to see is to understand the complexity of the issue as a whole, and especially don't reduce the politics just to one thing only, and that's to stop climate change. You have to take into consideration all of the relevant factors and focus more on mitigation and adaptation rather than just talking about climate change. So my point to you is in this lecture is that Judaism has a lot to say about climate change, and it actually understands the complexity of the issues, and it's not climatism. It doesn't reduce everything to one factor. But the reason Mike Hume is so important, he's a geographer by training. And the reason it's so important is that he paid attention to religion as a cultural factor that is part of this debate. So when we bring the religious factor to mind, we cannot start the conversation without talking about this guy. This is Lynn White Jr., who wrote a very short essay, really only 4 pages, The Historical Roots of Our Ecological Crisis. That's the title of the essay. And basically in that essay, which he delivered originally as a talk at the AAAS meeting in December 1966, and then it was published in 1967 in the magazine Science. So there he's arguing that it's the Bible, and especially Genesis 1:28, is the cause of our religious crisis, of our ecological crisis. And he's saying this in 1967, and that was really quite a shock for people to hear at the time. And Lynn White argued that, I'm quoting now, the more science and more technology are not going to get us out of the present ecological crisis until we find a new religion or think our old one. So he kind of challenged all the people in the world. Of course, he was writing primarily, not exclusively, but primarily for Christians, and challenging them to really think through the history of Christianity, the contribution of Christianity to the eco crisis. And if he's talking about Christianity, he's definitely talking about Judaism too, since this is, of course, from the Old Testament, or what we call the Hebrew Bible. So his challenge really started the field we call religion and ecology. This field goes under different names. You can talk about it as religion and environment. You can talk about it as religion and nature. You can talk about it as religion, nature, culture. But the bottom line that in the last, I would say since the early 70s, we have a whole new field that is known, or discourse, if you wish, that is known as the discourse of religion and ecology. This is a series of books, and you can see my book is here. This is the book on Judaism. These are 10 religions representing in this conversation about religion and ecology. These 2 people are the editors of the whole series, the 10 Harvard conferences and the 10 books that came out of it. And they're also the author of this wonderful book, very good, useful book, a textbook for courses like courses that I teach. They are at Yale now. They were somewhere else before, in Bucknell University for many years, but in the last whatever it is, 15 years or so, they've been at Yale. So they started a whole new field, and the field is about, look at the middle one, it's about recovery, revival, reinterpretation, reconstruction of the ecological wisdom of the various religious traditions. So it's a multi-faith approach, it's comparative approach, it's textual approach, and it's really kind of inviting people to look at their own tradition and to develop the ecological insight of their own tradition. So they are wonderful people. I'm very close to them, and they are really wonderful. They really created a worldwide movement. So they're very important. I highly recommend that you read their work. So where are they? Let me see. No, that's it. Okay. So where the initial response of Jews to the religion, to the argument by Lynn White was somewhat defensive. But at the same time, Jewish theologians said to Lynn White, listen, you're not fair to Judaism. You're only talking about one verse from Genesis 1:28. And that's really not doing justice to the Hebraic position or the biblical position about the natural world. What about Genesis 2:15? In which the human being was placed in the Garden of Eden in order, and I quote, to till or to till and protect, or to till and to tend the earth. So the argument of Jewish theologians was that Lynn White kind of gave us a skewed approach. But at the same time, I think that challenge that Lynn White posed to Jewish and to Christian theologians invited people to really look carefully at the Bible. What does the Bible say about the natural world? What are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to interact with the natural world? So in that sense, I think he was very, very productive and very, very good for us that he challenged us to really think about it. Here is the statement here from Rabbi Sachs. You're all familiar with him, I'm sure. He was the chief rabbi of the Hebrew congregation. It's mostly the Orthodox congregations in England. He passed away 2 years ago. And basically, in his wonderful book, To Heal the Fractured World, what we have is an important kind of an important statement that I would like to bring to your attention. And I'm quoting, "Global warming is not the result of one person using leaded petrol," that's of course an English term, or an aerosol spray, but of billions of acts distributed throughout the world. The effects of environmental damage caused by the destruction of rainforest or even exploitation of non-renewable energy sources may not be apparent during our lifetime. And here comes the key word. Where then is my responsibility? The key phrase. What duties do I have to something as amorphous as humanity in general, as inanimate as nature, or as intangible as generations not yet born? Any simple notion of responsibility is inadequate to such problem, which is why religious responsibility in the infinite in terms of space, eternal in terms of time, can sometimes be more cogent than secular alternatives. So Rabbi Sachs, whom I knew personally quite well, really tells us that involvement in environmental matters is really a religious obligation. When he used the word infinite responsibility, he kind of reminds, I think he specifically has in mind the way that Emmanuel Levinas talks about responsibility. And he's basically saying to us, listen, this is, as Jews, this is our problem, this is our responsibility, and we need to do something about it. So keep that in mind. I will say maybe one more quote that I didn't put on the slide about Rabbi Sachs, or from Rabbi Sachs, when he's telling us that the Bible really is about hope. So when he has a lot of reflections on Judaism as a religion of hope, and the idea here that hope is the source of our freedom. So because we have hope, we can be free. It means that history is not determined. We are free. We can do things. We can handle it. We can respond to challenges. And this is kind of his legacy to us. So we'll come to this point again maybe later. But basically, I think that it's the Bible, especially the Bible, even more than the Talmud and more than other parts of the Jewish tradition. It's the Bible itself that has deep ecological wisdom, and they could support, in my view, sound environmental policies and practices. So now, if you want to read books about Judaism and environment, here's a list of books. This is a collection of essays that appeared in 2001. It's basically all the conversation in the Jewish ecological discourse up to that point. The next book is by Ellen Bernstein, the woman who really created the Jewish environmental movement in 1988. And that's her early book. She has now a more recent book, but anything from Ellen Bernstein is worth reading. This is also a terrific book, kind of how to be, these are all books that you can use in your synagogue. You can take chapters from them and study them and really get into what they're trying to tell you. Jeremy Benstein is an American who made Aliyah and is an important environmentalist in Israel. This is more scholarly book, which may be a little bit more difficult, but it's a relationship between how the Kabbalistic tradition has important ecological messages to us. This is a more recent book from 2019 by Tanchum Yoreh, who is an Orthodox Jew. I'll show you a picture of him later on. And he is at Toronto, and that focuses on one important precept of the Jewish tradition, and that's do not waste. Do not destroy. He translated it as waste not, and that's a lovely translation, but it's in Hebrew, it's called Bal Tashchit, do not destroy. And this is the most recent book, came just this year, last year, 2023. The Sacred Earth. The first essay is actually by me, and you're welcome to read the whole essays. It's published by the CCR, so it's very much a reform movement product, and highly recommended. In other words, we have all those books available, and the only thing is we need to start reading them and getting to know what's available. Here are three important organizations. This is the older of the three. This is from 1993. It was a very important organization. COJEL is the Coalition of Life and Coalition of Environment and Jewish Life. This Chazon, this one here, was founded in 2000. But after 20 years, it's basically now folded into Adama. Adama is a merger of two environmental organizations. One is Chazon, and the other one is a particular retreat center in Maryland. I'll show you I'll have some more information about it at all. But basically, Chazon merged with Pearlstone Retreat Center, and this is the new thing. So these are just three. There are many more organizations, but these are the major ones. So here is kind of a timeline, just to give you some sense of time, how things evolved over time. So I would say that early 80s, the Shalom Center in Philadelphia, Reconstructionist movement was very important. It's going to be connected with the name of Arthur Waskow. I'll show you we'll come back to him, a very important and influential environmental activist. Unfortunately, he's not going to be with us for long. He's in his 90s now, but he was really crucial to the whole movement of Jewish environmentalism. This Shomrei Adama that Ellen Bernstein created is from 1988. And that was the first national non-denominational organization. And she was really crucial in putting environmentalism on the minds, kind of on the awareness of Jews in America. COJEL, I already mentioned COJEL. This is the location, is the Isabella Friedman Center, a retreat center. It's an older operation that started from the late 19th and actually is kind of a camp for Jewish girls from New York. And it became a very important contributor to the Jewish environmental movement. They established in 1994 the Teva Learning Center. Right now, it's all folded into Adama. So right now, Adama is the owner, but before that, Chazon was the owner, and before that, they were separate. So you kind of get a sense of the shifts over time in terms of organizations. 2006, I put on the list the first food conference, because food conferences are also part of the aspects of the Jewish environmental movement. 2014, Isabella Friedman merged with Chazon. 2021, we have this new organization, People, Planet, Purpose, which is the merger of Chazon and Pearlstone. So this is just to give you a sense that what Jewish environmentalism is about. It's a lot of activism, and I'm just giving you the tip of the iceberg in terms of the organizations. So I'm moving now to focus primarily on Jewish responses, denominational responses to climate change. And I'm going to emphasize plurality. I'm going to emphasize change over time, shared religious idiom, and down-to-earth Judaism. So how is it, let me make sure, yeah, okay. So how is it that we have a conversation about climate change, and where were the Jews in this conversation? I'm going to introduce you not really do justice to these wonderful people here. But these are four people, four American Jews that a lot of people may know the name, but probably not connect them to Jewish environmentalism. So this is Robert Marshall, the son of Louis Marshall, probably known to you. He's the founder of the Wilderness Society. And if you want to choose an organization to contribute to, that's a good organization to contribute to. So he was a very fascinating character. Grew up basically in a reform family, and then kind of moved away from Judaism, and his environmentalism sort of replaced his Jewish commitment. But he was very, very important in the history of environmentalism in America. This is Barry Commoner, the person who created the conversation about the four laws of ecology, and really was very crucial in making environmentalism part of, kind of put it on the map of of American consciousness, what we need to do concerning the atomic bomb, for example, concerning pollution. So he was very, very important. This is Murray Bookchin, a very interesting character, really was a character, kind of an anarchist, and originally communist, but then became anarchist and developed what we call social ecology. And this is Paul Ehrlich, who was a biologist and was the person who spoke about overpopulation, the danger of overpopulation. Now, I bring them all to you because I'm saying that secular Jews, or Jews who were not necessarily religious, who don't think of themselves in religious categories, were very much at the forefront of environmentalism in America. So it's not a coincidence that Jews in the reform movement, as you'll see in a minute, in the mid-60s already had some ideas about environmentalism. So this resolution of the Union of Reform Judaism took the lead. And this is about a year ahead of Lynn White Jr. When the reform movement already recognizes it, that environmental pollution is a crime against life. Listen to the language, a crime against life. And they recognize all of the problems and even define it. I really appreciate the fact that they understood it in terms of a tragedy. Something really tragic is happening here, and the Union of Reform Judaism already understood it and really spoke against it already in the 70s. So if you look at the timeline, the reform movement really was incredible in taking the initiative, in identifying problems. I give you some of the dates. I can give you more dates, but you get the point. If you look at that chart, kind of, or that story here, we start with issues of conservation. We move into environmental pollution issues, then energy policies, then first industrial toxins, then issues of environmental racism. That's going to be connected with environmental justice. So here, in these two, topics become very, very, very important in the late 80s and early 90s. Climate change is from the late 90s. That's basically because of the failure of the Kyoto Agreement. And clearly, from then on, we have climate change emerging as what I would call the face of the crisis. And more and more, it's clear that climate change has to be understood as a social justice issue. The conversation here became very, very important in 2015, and so forth. Of course, there was a Paris Agreement. The United States was in. Then when Trump came into power, United States was out. Reform movement spoke very critically about that move. I may mention it again. So the bottom line is recognition was there from the very beginning, and the reform movement really took notice of this. If you look at, as I've done, I've looked at many statements of the CCAR, and you have some of the dates here, so you can see all the issues that they dealt with. and they really spoke about environmental issues in terms of national responsibility and even personal responsibility. And clearly, they made it wasn't just theoretical, they also suggested specific things that we can do and specific policies that we should get into. So clearly the reform movement, I think, should be recognized as the leader in this conversation. In a CCR, this is an important for us to kind of recognize that climate change is fundamentally a social justice issue. So this is the language from 2017. And clearly, there's no doubt that the reform movement understood the issue correctly. I'm shifting to the Jewish renewal movement just to tell you that reform movement is not the only contributor to this conversation. The leaders of the Jewish renewal movement, this is, of course, Zalman Schachter Shalomi, this is Arthur Waskow, this is Rabbi Arthur Green. These are their students. So all of them, all three of them are involved in environmental, not just environmental activism, but also in eco-theology. So these are all theologians. That's Zeli Golden, who lives in Berkeley area and is a kind of an important activist and created his own organization. This is David, no, what's his last name? Just I have a senior moment here. I just showed you his book. No, Phil, help me here. What's his last name of David?
I don't know this person.
Seidenberg. This is David Seidenberg. Sorry, I missed the last term, the last name. And this is Ariel Mays. So these are examples of younger people who are building their eco-theology. A lot of it is inspired by Kabbalah, by Hasidism, by the interpretation of these people who are really in the Jewish renewal movement using Kabbalah and Kabbalistic or Hasidic or Neo-Hasidic categories in order to develop an earth-based type Judaism. So, for example, Zelig created the Wilderness Torah organization, and the idea here is that we need a kind of a Jewishness of being Jewish that is not going to be bookish, that is not going to be too tied to the rabbinic tradition. We have to go back to the origins of it all and articulate something really, really distinctive. And that's what he's trying to do. Oh, it's almost kind of finding God in nature. That's part of the mission of these people. So that's in the Jewish renewal movement. Arthur Waskow is the person who popularized this kind of eco-culture. I'm not sure if people are familiar with it, but one time I lectured on this topic and the people in the audience were not familiar with eco-culture. So I was kind of surprised, but this is the term was probably coined by Zalman Schachter Shalomi, but it was publicized or popularized by Arthur Waskow. And the idea here is that the well-being and fecundity of the land depends on human moral conduct. So if we are morally wrong, if we are unjust in our way of being in the world, it's going to impact every aspect, including the natural aspect. So the logic here, if you wish, the logic here goes all the way to the logic of Deuteronomy. And basically the idea that in order to care for the earth, we need to care for the socially marginal. And to translate it into action, when you think about kashrut, you think not just in terms of what you put in your mouth, whether it was properly slaughtered or not, but rather how you treated the people who produce, the people who consume, the people who distribute the food. So eco-justice and eco-kosher are two sides of the same coin, and these are some of the labels that you can actually get for products that are cohere with that view. So that's as far as the Jewish renewal movement. I would say that these people created what we can call Jewish ecological spirituality. Under the impact of Kabbalah and Hasidism, this is much more pantheistic or panentheistic. If you want to read more, these are new books. These are 2 volumes that Rabbi Arthur Green and his student Ariel Mays published about 2 years ago. But the idea here is that Judaism can be spiritually linked to the natural world. So whether it's pantheistic or panentheistic, we can debate that issue. Arthur Green defines his own approach as panentheistic rather than pantheistic. Zalman Schachter Shalomi thinks that the difference is really too insignificant. But the point is that we can think about the natural world in those terms. Reconstructionist Judaism, which is close to the Jewish kind of between the Jewish renewal movement and the conservative movement. If you look at their official position, they dealt with every environmental issue that was relevant. Really, through the 80s, these are the list of issues that they have official statements about. And I would say that they've been quite active in various organizations that deal with environmental issues. This is Rabbi Fred Sherlinder Dabb, one of the leaders. He's a very important player in interfaith. He was very important in interfaith environmental activism. And he's inspired not so much by Hasidism, more by Buber, although of course there is a connection here. But if we look at his statements where he says real relationship to God cannot be achieved on earth if real relations to the world and to mankind are lacking. So both love of the creator and love of that which God has created are finally one and the same. So he was very involved in Kojel, very involved in Power and Light. That's an interfaith organization. Reconstructionist movement came up with this Tikkun Olam initiative. A lot of congregations were part of it. All this is kind of old. There's nothing, I'm not telling you something that happened right now. A lot of initiatives in environmentalism kind of stay for whatever 5-10 years and then they peter out. That's a kind of a problem in this field. Perhaps it's a problem in any field. Conservative Judaism has not been much behind, and in terms of the scholarship about environmentalism, a lot of the scholarship really came from conservative rabbis. The person, I think I have do I have another? Let's see. No, I don't have it here. Let's say maybe I'll have it. But one of the people who really contributed to environmental discourse was Rabbi Larry Foster. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2019. But conservative Judaism also took environmentalism very seriously, generated a lot of the scholarship in this special issue from 1984 that already they devoted a lot of attention to it in the 80s. And then they have a lot of resolutions and really taking that. What's different here is they spoke a lot in terms of policies. You'll see it. They have very clear suggestions and recommendations what you need to do in order to deal with environmental issues. So I like this statement from their 2001 Rabbinical Assembly resolution where they say the language of stewardship, right? Humanity must serve as faithful stewards of creation. Okay, we need to think of ourselves as people who take care. That's what I mean by protection of God's created world. We need to turn, these are all terms from the biblical text. That's Genesis 2:15. Protect and preserve the world. That's our job. As Jews, we need to be aware that we are destroying the earth and what we need to do in order to correct what we have done, all the damage that we have brought upon the earth. So this statement says it really beautifully. And it's all about, in the end, of kind of how to ensure that our children and our grandchildren and the generations thereafter will really benefit from health and well-being. Right now, it doesn't look like we are going in that direction. So the Rabbinical Assembly, various resolutions also speak in very specific terms, policy recommendations. You have some examples here. So this is kind of what I mean by down-to-earth Judaism. This is not my term. This is Arthur Waskow's term, actually. But you can deal with financial. You can deal with financial incentives. You can deal. Of course, you have to deal with regulation, and you have to be very, very concrete if you're going to deal with issues that affect climate change. This is the person that I wanted to share with you. That's Lawrence Truster, who passed away. And anything that if you can get any of his essays, or this is his last book about, it's a kind of a reader about water in the Jewish tradition. So that good book to do seminar on and kind of share with the congregation some of the resources within the Jewish tradition. Here, Larry is talking to Mary Evelyn Tucker, and he really did a very, very important work in terms of interfaith work. So speaking of interfaith work, these are some organizations, and I cannot stop it, so just ignore that sound of the phone, unfortunately. But these are various organizations. And I like the fact that, again, we see the word responsibility. It's a Jewish responsibility to address global climate change. So once we think in terms of responsibility, which means our response to the challenge, I think we can get a lot done and be part of a much larger conversation. So here are other activities and initiatives that conservative movement have done in terms of carbon neutrality. What you need to do is very, very specific. What do people actually do, whether as individuals or members of congregation? That's another story. Here is an example of Seder Tu B'Shvat. Of this is a Kabbalistic practice which has been recovered in recent decades, primarily by people interested in environmentalism. So I don't know if the congregation has a Seder Tu B'Shvat or not, but that's something that you can think about as something that the congregation can do and bring to mind environmental issues. So here are the various policies, the various kind of actions that we need to take in terms of, whether it's energy audits, whether it's dealing with waste, whether it's dealing with greening our homes. The awareness was across the board, and I really suggest to you that there are a lot of things that we can do if we just put our mind to it. So in terms of transportation, in terms of building codes, in terms of energy use, and so forth. In 2000, sustainability became a Jewish value. Lots of organizations, these are, you already saw those organizations, but it's all over the place. I could have put many more. The sample could be even larger than what I share with you, but basically sustainability is in. So we are now 20 years since sustainability became a Jewish value. And the question is, how well are we doing? What can we do more? What more can we do, and so forth. Now let's move to Orthodoxy. Orthodoxy too Orthodoxy is on board, but it came later than the liberal movements. So 1988, they really didn't get seriously on it until this organization, Kanfei Nesharim, was founded. It was founded by a woman, by Yvonne Marzouk, who was very influenced by Art Waskow. But since this date, primarily, we are going to see that they developed their own particular way of what they call Torah-based environmentalism. And they clearly are attentive to climate change. They don't deny climate change. They are really doing what they can do, especially in terms of education. So in 2019, again, this organization merged with another organization, and a lot of it is basically done only online. But this is just to tell you that Orthodox Judaism, modern Orthodox Judaism, at least, is on board. I bring this person to your attention because he was an important environmentalist. He's an Orthodox math professor. in New York, a vegan. So veganism is one way. He was for many years very active in this vegan organization of North America. Richard Schwartz is his name. So he started the writing already in the early 80s. And I think it's very interesting how veganism became a way for Orthodox Jews to express their environmental consciousness. So what's the bottom line? The bottom line is that it's across the board. I introduce you to yet another person. That's my colleague here in Phoenix. That's Shmuley Yanklowitz, who is kind of, I would call him a spiritual entrepreneur. He kind of is a charismatic leader. Has a lot of there are more like initiatives than organizations, but the point is that you can combine environmental consciousness with Torah, commitment to Torah, and you can deal with a whole range of social issues, but also issues that relate to animal suffering, and not just the suffering of people, the oppression of people, but also the suffering of animals. His main intellectual inspiration is Itz Greenberg, and it's a kind of a profile that appeals to a lot of people, especially younger people. So bottom line, it's across the board. This is Tanhum Yoreh, who teaches. What's interesting about him, that he combines real knowledge of environmental science and environmentalism as a religious activism with his commitment to Orthodox Judaism. So he's an Orthodox Jew and very involved, and argues that we can bring the message of environmentalism to Orthodox Jews if we know how to teach the Jewish text to them and how to share with them what they need to know. So I feel I have a question about time. How much time are you allowing me? And I will deal with the slides accordingly. Phil? Oh, you're still muted.
I have the same illness that so many others have. Yeah, I'd say another 10 to 15 minutes of
Okay,
presentation.
good. If it's 10, 15 minutes, we are fine. So this is a again it's a book that it's not easy book to read. I would admit that. It's a lot of legal text that he tries to parse for the reader. But the message is that we've got to bring to that Orthodox Jews could be environmentally involved if you teach the material in the proper way. That's basically the message. So this is kind of the bottom line, that why I think that it's not the case that Orthodoxy is against environmentalism. Absolutely not. For example, before Naftali Bennett, when he was the Prime Minister of Israel, and he went to COP26 in Glasgow, we have a statement for 43 Orthodox rabbis in Israel that basically recognize the urgency of dealing with climate change, and reducing climate change must be, as they say, these are Orthodox rabbis who are telling him, central focus of Jewish life today. So across the board, all denominations, except maybe ultra-Orthodox, I have to admit that, everybody is kind of aware and on board. This was a Tfilat Hader that was given to President Biden before he went to Glasgow. And here's an example of how religious language can be used by all people, all Jews who use religious categories. They were very much on board. This was a kind of a interdenominational ceremony in Washington before Biden went to COP26. So if that's the case, my point is that we have a lot in common across the board, and what we need to do is to get our act together and to work together. So this comes from one of the Rabbinical Assembly documents. This is from 201. And look at the language, and immediately you can recognize this religious language. We are all created in the Tzelem Elohim, And since we are all equally God's children, we should all equally share in the bounty and travails of the earth. So if the earth is suffering, all of us, all human beings, need to deal with this issue. And we have, again, this language of religious responsibility and how we learn, and we must learn to live within the ecological limits of the earth. We cannot exploit it. We cannot go overboard. We can't do things which are diminishing the fecundity of the earth because we are using it in an improper way. That's basically kind of the basic insights. So in terms of climate advocacy, as I said, since 1998, but throughout the 2000s, we're going to see a lot of activities. There's climate advocacy, and there is shared work across the various denominations. So here are some of the principles. Number one, climate change is a moral issue because people are not impacted by it equally. Some people suffer more than others, some regions are more susceptible, and so forth. So how do we deal with the moral dimension of the problem? That's really the challenge. If we care about justice, we should apply the value of justice to climate change issues, and especially climate refugees issues. That's going to be a biggie. And climate justice requires a change in our financial activities. So economic issues and social issues are tied. You can't deal with social issues without paying attention to economic issues. That's kind of the message. And ultimately, we see the world is now wounded. The world is not doing well. And if things are happening in certain parts, such as Indonesia or such as Brazil, where you have a real devastation of natural resources on a massive scale, that's really to call it a crime would be an understatement. So there are a lot of bad things are happening right now, and we need to stand up and we need to do something about it. This is Rabbi Jeannie Rosen. We'll see her again. She is the founder of the organization Dayenu, a call for Jewish action on climate change. So the activism is here, and that's an example of various organizations. All of them are concerned with climate change. So this is the Jewish Climate Leadership Coalition, and that's sponsored or powered by Adama. Adama, as you know, replaced Chazon as the primary Jewish environmental organization. Here is the inspiration for all of this activism. That's Arthur Waskow. That's from a good number, that's at least from 2 decades ago, these pictures. So it doesn't look like that today, unfortunately, but is absolutely important. And I highly recommend, I hope you have it in your library, The Tour of the Earth. That's 2 volumes of resources. That's in the beginning, that's from 2000, and that's kind of the beginning of the discourse on Judaism and environment. This is also his interpretation of the tradition, a very important book to have, and that's the most recent book, primarily more on climate change. The excellent section there on climate change. And he was using the Shalom Center as the way to publicize a lot of his activism, and I think that all of us are really in his debt, because without him, probably Jewish environmentalism would not have been what it has become over the years. So he really was kind of a prophet, an environmental prophet, if you wish. Here are some of his activities as climate advocacy. Basically, it's the issue of our time. So Mike Hume could accuse him of being kind of a climatist, reducing everything to climate change, but I don't think that's fair to say, because his approach is very broad, and he's especially connected to ecology. It connects ecology and economy. When he talks against the carbon pharaohs, he definitely has a critique of capitalism. He was very much a socialist originally, was connected to social ecology. So his message is very much in terms of that's the kind of the the orientation. But again, you can see his support for the Green Deal. He joined the strike for climate action. So you know exactly where to locate him on our political map. But I would say that all of us are in his debt. These are some policies that the COGIL, the organization of the Coalition of Environment and Jewish Life, they recommended a whole set of organizations. In other words, if you're getting serious about climate change, you need to talk about specific policies. These are just example of various initiatives that the Energy Covenant Campaign and the Jewish Climate Change Campaign, these are all how do you marshal resources and organization to deal with these particular issues? Another person that we should not ignore is the impact of Pope Francis I. The Laudato Si. Laudato Si is a very important book. I highly recommend that everybody read it. It's 180 pages or so, but it's very well written, and it's a wonderful introduction to climate change issues, to the ecological crisis, in a way that is really very moving. And what he kind of calls us to do is to care for creation. That's what it's about. Ultimately, it's about caring. And of course, the inspiration for that is biblical. It comes from the very chapters of Genesis, especially Genesis chapter 2. His kind of his organization, the Laudato Si movement that he started, really impacted the rabbinic voices. So there was a rabbinic letter on climate crisis signed by 500 rabbis. Clearly, they were inspired by Laudato Si, and they again introduced us this notion. Of course, the slogan that you're already familiar with is how climate change can fall under the rubric of Tikkun Olam. A lot of people use that slogan as kind of an umbrella or kind of an overarching concept that mobilizes people to action. So whether you call it Tikkun Olam, and then Tikkun Olam is related to Tikkun Tevel, the idea is we need to start healing a wounded planet. We live on a wounded planet. We suffer from it, but many other species suffer from that woundedness, and we need to do something about it. And clearly, the language of Laudato Si is in the same. It was an important inspiration. The rabbinic letter also came up with various recommendations. Again, you can deal with there are financial dimension, there are architectural dimensions here, there are all sorts of policy, what you need to do to support this organization rather than that organization. So a lot has to do with choices about energy, source energy resources, and what to do about them. So you get a sense of the activism that follows from this commitment to doing something about climate change. So these are the aspects of climate advocacy. Most people do this. Most people are involved in education. Networking is part of it. All those organizations. This is Dayenu, the organization of Rabbi Rosen. This started by Mirale Goldsmith. So it's this one that's also her organization, and that's an initiative of Adama. But if you look at what they do, this is what they do. So you can find something that is relevant to you, and you can find ways to connect with particular things that they are doing. But every person involved in climate advocacy is doing something related to the list that I put on the slide. So here again, this is Rabbi Rosen. This is some of activities. A lot of it is about marches and so forth. Whether you want to get involved or not, of course, it's up to you. But that's and how impactful, we can talk about how impactful or not. But this is what people do. I do want to mention the importance of women in the environmental organizations. These are some of the women. She's no longer alive, but she was very important, paying attention to environmentalism already in the 70s and early 80s. And she started She started the press, a Micah Press, where she published books related to that. Mirly Goldsmith is, I already mentioned her, Rabbi Rosen, Nina Cardin. So here are some of the people, and I'll show you the next slide. These are the women. So this is Kalishovsky, this is Nina Cardin, this is Yvonne Marzouk, an Orthodox woman, Rabbi Rosen. This is, of course, Judith Plaskow. That's Jill Hammer, who is a conservative rabbi, very important in kind of Tel Shemesh. She created Tel Shemesh, and then the Hebrew Priestess Institute. This is Nili Simhai, who is very kind of an activist, but also teacher, a nature teacher. This is Rabbi Lynn Gottlieb. So the bottom line, this over here is Mirly Goldsmith. So the bottom line is women are very involved and contributed to it, to the movement. I think we should be all very indebted to them. This is a little bit about the Glasgow. Glasgow was a little bit better than the two that came after Glasgow, the two UN conferences. But we have to ask how successful or really how unsuccessful these these meetings, international meetings, really are. So that's a story of the UN conference. We don't have to worry, but I just want to show you kind of the trajectory. And if we look at the future and kind of by way of ending it, I would say let's look at the bottom here. We have a challenge, and that's how to adapt to climate change. Climate change is happening. We're not going to stop it. It's impossible to stop it. But we need to adapt. And what do we need to do? Our task is to care globally, but to act locally. Our hope is our youth, our children, our youngsters. So Chazon was very involved in creating a youth initiative, that commitment to environmentalism among teenagers and early people who are young adults. I think that's an important thing. And that's the message that we have to keep in mind. We inherited a garden, we must not leave a desert to our children. And if we just think about that statement, I think we can really create a positive future. So that's the message. What Jewish activism teaches us, we need to promote sustainable practices. We can do a lot of things in synagogues, a lot of things in Jewish communities by creating urban gardens. We can be much more open to the natural world, be more concerned with outdoors activities, more involved. We can, ritually speaking, we can introduce nature into our awareness when we engage in Jewish practices, various holidays, each holiday especially. Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, these are all environmental holidays or have an environmental dimension. So when we celebrate those holidays, we can bring it to the center. We can engage in eco-justice activity when we think about what we consume, how we consume, what we can do better. And of course, there's always an educational dimension. And this is, again, a list of things that we can do. We can become aware, we can become informed, we can change the way we live, we can join organizations, we can contribute to organizations. There's lots that can be done, and I think actually the Jewish communities are well suited to address those challenges. So that's my summary to you. Basically, climate change is a Jewish issue. We have a lot of resources, and I didn't even give you the various resources. That's another lecture. But we have all the resources on all level, ethical, theological, philosophical. We've got it. We just need to know our sources and to access them and to make them our own. And basically all, except for Orthodoxy, and even among the Orthodoxy in certain parts in Israel, of course, you can find attentiveness to environmental issues, so even among them. But we need to take it seriously, and we need to collaborate. We need to collaborate within the Jewish world, and we need to collaborate with non-Jewish environmental organizations. I really think that that's the job of the rabbis and the leaders of the Jewish community, to get involved in interfaith environmentalism. So with that, I'm going to say thank you. And if you have any questions, I'll be glad to entertain questions.
Professor,
Well, just
I've
a
got
second.
Rabbi, I've got a question.
Just a second, please. Why don't you take down the screen share so we can see the whole screen of our,
Yes.
there you go. Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Did I take it down?
Ezra, you have the floor.
Thank you. Professor, are you familiar with Michael Schellenberger, who was a co-founder of Greenpeace, and his book Apocalypse Never?
Yeah, I think what's his name? He works with another person whose name now escaped me.
Are you
Yes,
familiar with his book?
yeah. Who am I talking to?
Ezra Greenhouse.
Oh, Ezra
I'm in there
Greenhouse, okay.
somewhere.
Okay,
Well,
yes.
he makes several good points, and he's much more, he's skeptical of the doomsayers, but he makes a couple of good points, I think. He says that there are hundreds of millions of people living in dire poverty around the world, not because of pollution, but because they don't have electrical power. And the only way to do that is, unfortunately, right now, is more traditional ways. But that, he says, he's not as concerned about the impact of climate change as he is about getting people out of poverty. The other point he makes, and I'll keep it quick, is if you seriously believe that the Earth is at dire straits because of climate change, then why not look again toward nuclear power, which is the cleanest power there is? And I don't see many mention of that. So I think,
if I recall, and I have to go back to his writings, what's the name of the institute that I think he created that institute? What was the name of that? Anyway, the point is, I think that he was making is that technology is the solution. That most of the issues that we are dealing with, there are other ways besides environmentalism that can deal with those challenges, and technology such as nuclear technology is the way to go. Okay, so I'm definitely not an expert on nuclear technology. From what I understand, it's probably something that we cannot do entirely without, at least for the time being, but it's not a healthy technology. If we can find other healthier technology, we should go with them. But as a kind of a bridge to totally renewable energy sources, probably we will need to use, at least for a while and under certain controls, nuclear energy. However, the risk of that is very high, obviously, and I'm sure that he's aware of it as well as probably you are as well.
wouldn't you say it's going to be very hard to get wind energy or solar power to do the kind of heavy lifting that's going to be needed to bring people out of poverty?
Yeah, somebody wants to answer that? Yes, go ahead, yes. Christine.
Let me lower my hand first. Well, there are many examples actually on a small scale around the world of people in impoverished neighborhoods who have put solar and wind generator on the roofs of their buildings. And so these are small scale, but they are effective. The other thing is that there are new, easily made devices that are not sort of heavily dependent on investments that are beyond people's reach, that can generate enough power or water or anything else. They have these ingenious water collection baskets, sort of like large sort of tent-like baskets that are being used in Malawi and some other African countries in arid regions to collect dew at night. And it's effective. It's not mass scale, but it is effective. And those are the kinds of things that people don't pay attention to that actually, they work. They work for the people in a community. But that wasn't my question. I had a question too. First of all, Dr. Samuelson, I am very thankful that you were not only informative, but inspirational. And I really appreciate the history lesson. I'm telling you, it's really helpful for somebody who's a sort of history junkie like me. But I had a kind of, it really is a question. At least in the US, and I am thinking about my family, but also in general, that ecological awareness really took off in 1962 with Rachel Carson's
yeah.
Silent Spring. Well, it wasn't made much of at the time, in part because her family is very complex, but she was a Jew. You know, I mean,
Rachel Carson wasn't, not to my
no,
knowledge.
she later converted to Christianity,
Or
but
late,
she was born to a Jewish family, grew up in a Jewish family in Brooklyn, I think it was, and her name was Zeta Louise something or other. Anyway, and but if you read Silent Spring, I went back and reread Silent Spring just because of that. My mother immediately switched to organic everything as soon as that book came out, to my father's shock and dismay. But if you reread the book with these notions that you've introduced us to, it imbues the whole book. It's very, very interesting. And so
you know, if she's Jewish, this is really the discovery of it's a huge discovery, because
by the
I
time
don't
she
know
wrote
that
the
that's-
book, by the time she wrote the book, she had converted to Christianity. I think she married a guy who was a Christian.
because Lisa Sideris, who is one of her biographers,
Yeah.
I don't believe, I have to go back now to Lisa's works, but I don't recall anyone mention her Jewishness. And if she is a convert, it's music to my ears in many ways. But I only knew her about her as a Presbyterian, not as a Jew.
Yeah, she was a Presbyterian later. Let me quickly do this.
Very, very interesting. And thank you. No, thank you for your for that information, because
I have the information right here.
You had it. Okay.
Okay. Rachel Carson, 1907 to 1964, born Ada Louise Landman in New York City, an only child in a middle-class Jewish family. Growing up in Manhattan, she strolled around the streets, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so.
Terrific. No, this is perfect. But I have to tell you that
I don't know the circumstances of how she became a Presbyterian, because it seems like such a contradiction.
No, I can understand that, but this is really important. Thank you for the reference. And what's interesting to me, that half a year before that book came out, before Silent Spring came out, Maury Bookchin wrote his book, Synthetic Society, basically warning us about toxicity in every aspect of our life. He wrote the book under an assumed name, so people didn't make the connection between Maury Bookchin, who became the father of social ecology, and Louis Haber, who was the name that he used on that book. But I'm not surprised, in a sense. The fact that she was Jewish is not totally surprising, because Jews, especially, was she come of a communist background by any chance?
I don't know. I mean, I was curious, so I Googled it, of course, like everybody else today.
Yeah, and, that is fascinating. Okay, no, I'm
I also have to say I knew Maury Bookchin.
Oh, you know Maury Bookchin? Yeah, very interesting character. All right, let's go to some other question from Wendy.
You stop banging the dishes for a minute. Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to make a couple of points. First of all, on your slide where it says, let's agree to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius or lower. Well, we're already there. So it's a little too late for that. So all we can do is try to minimize the temperature anomaly, because we're already there. We're going to lose our island nations. Another thing I wanted to address was the question earlier about nuclear power. The problem with nuclear power is, first of all, our current nuclear facilities are old, and they're expensive to maintain, and they're being shut down. And if we want to build new ones, they take several years to build, and you emit a lot of CO2 in the process. And then, of course, there's always the problem of what do you do with the waste? You just can't get around that problem. Because we don't want to be like the Soviets and dump our radioactive waste in the ocean. It's not a good solution.
Yeah.
And someone else was talking about what's called energy deserts, where people don't have access to electricity. So yeah, that's usually in your poorer nations. And that was something they talked about in the Paris Agreement, was how to help developing countries with energy deserts to put in solar panels and such. If you've seen Al Gore's sequel to Inconvenient Truth, he talks about that in that book, in that movie, and that was interesting. One more point also I wanted to make was that someone that put in chat about population growth, because when there's more people, there's more consumption and then more CO2 emitted, et cetera. So there's a simple solution to population growth, and that is just educate the girls, because an educated woman will have fewer children and have them later in life. Unfortunately, that's a controversial idea in some parts of the world. So, so yeah, those are just a few points I wanted to make. And also, one more thing, when climatologists run their models and try to look at projections for future temperature anomalies, one thing they don't really talk about, there's a huge range of options that could happen. It could be anywhere from 2 degrees anomaly up to 9. I mean, there's a huge range of possibilities. And one of the problems we've had with the IPCC reports is they don't want to sound like alarmists. So instead of doing the scientific thing, which is pick the middle value, they pick the bottom end, you know, the extreme bottom, so they don't sound like alarmists. And so that's why I think when they put out their latest report in 22, they kind of rang the bell a little too late, because they could have done that sooner.
Yeah, but, you know, thank you for all those very informed and useful comments. And here's my kind of dilemma. In a sense, the information that you that you shared with us, a lot of the information was known for so many years, and we don't pay attention to it. So that's kind of the mystery of the situation. Why have we ignored it for so long? It's not that it wasn't there, the information was there. So okay, we can talk about the politics of the situation and why, you know, how certain people push for certain perspectives, but I'm amazed by the fact that the failure of humanity really to deal with it, even though Jim Henson talked about that stuff already a long time ago. So it's not that we didn't have the knowledge. We have the data, we have the knowledge, but we don't have the will, we don't have the determination and the willingness to do what's needed. So you are portraying a more dire situation, more dire picture, I guess, than what I shared with you. But yeah, the situation is very sad and it's very tragic. So what shall we do? Are we going to be depressed? Are we going to be, you know, cynical? But what shall we do? That's the challenge.
I have to correct myself, because there's a disagreement on the internet about whether she was born a Presbyterian or not. Okay, there's a real fight going on about this, and I don't know what to tell you. You know, they both, I think probably she was born a Presbyterian from this fight, but there's a fight going on. And I
so we go back to the
stumbled
older
on it.
This is the previous question, but let's stay with Wendy's question. So you see what I'm saying? I think that if you're saying yes, it's too late. Yeah, okay. So suppose that's the case. It's too late. So what's available to us? What shall we do as educators, as people who care, who really want to make the world a better place? What shall we do? So I'm kind of throwing it back to you.
Well, the technology is already there, and California is a good example of that. We're already getting a large fraction of our power from wind and solar. And usually how these things go is how California goes is how the nation goes, which is how the rest of the world goes. So we're just kind of waiting for everyone else to catch up with us. But the problem in general is that people don't like it when science says you're doing it wrong. And change is hard and scary. So there's all that built into it as well.
Yeah, no, I think that renewable energy, it will be, it is the way to go, and it is the way we are going. It's not just the way to go, it's the way we are going, but it's not going to be simple, and it's not going to get us maybe where we want to be at the pace that we want to be or should be. So that's the challenges, and I don't know what to do. I'm only an educator, so all I can do is bring to my students an awareness of those problems and basically tell them, look, the world is yours. I'm going to be here, whatever, another 20 years, but you're going to be here 50 years or beyond. So do something about it. But that's all a person like me, like us, can do. It's very local and it's very limited. It's not on a level of policy because we are not in Washington, and we can only vote for the right people who will go to Washington, right? But you know, it's a mess. It's and it's a tragic mess because things could have been taken care of 40, 50, even 60 years ago, and we didn't do it when it was possible. So
Right.
that's kind of where I stand. So we have to do what we have to do, but how impactful it's going to be, who knows?
Yeah, well, JFK was cautioned about climate change in the 60s. So it's something we've known about for a very long time. My field is air quality, and I used to teach this stuff. I taught an air quality class at Cal Poly Pomona a few times. And I had a whole section on climate change where everyone gets depressed. And then I said, okay, let's talk about solutions to show that, you know, it doesn't have to be this way. So, the idea is well, what's happening today also, which is encouraging, is renewable energy is getting cheap. And so it makes fiscal sense to do renewable. So that's one huge thing where market forces are kind of starting to lean in our favor these days.
Yeah. No, I think it will do, but everything is happening too slow. I see that Betsy has a hand up. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you for this talk. It's so great to hear not only the history, as Christine said, but to hear the Jewish themes woven into it. The point I wanted to make is a little off the subject of science, but you know, I come from a social work and therapy background, and there are so many young people who suffer now from what should be a new diagnosis in the DSM-3, which is climate anxiety.
Yeah.
A real increase in the number of young people whose fears, you know, are so focused on this and how this is going to impact them and their health and their futures. And so we're not only dealing about the physical aspects of what climate change is going to do to the population, but, you know, we have mental health.
Yeah. You were cut off. I guess you're
Our children to think.
Yeah, I couldn't hear the last comment, but basically, I think I understand what you're saying.
So many. Yeah, just, you know, the mental health of our young people is really at stake here as well. And raising healthy children to be able to deal with these problems and not feel incapacitated by them it's a very big problem in a time when there are so many other challenges confronting these kids as well. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to make that
Absolutely.
point as
No,
well.
you're absolutely right. And that's why I like to dealing with, I mean, I deal with young adults at the university level, but I think that if we incorporate a lot more attention to environmentalism in early aspects of our educational system and educational process, we will do our children a lot of good. So most children, especially in urban environment, they have no connection to the natural world. They really grow in deserts in kind of they're disconnected from the natural world. They don't live the rhythm that I, growing up in a kibbutz in Israel, took for granted. So I think that we can do an awful lot to help children by introducing, for example, a garden. To every school should have a garden. children should work in the garden from very young age. People in first grade, second grade, third grade can be involved in that. So imagine if every congregation, every school would have an urban garden, what could have happened? I think a lot. And that is connected to mental health. When you take care of plants, when you are committed to plants, where you are, you have a sense of caring for things like that, also for animals. I grew up in the kibbutz also with animals, and from very young age, we took care of animals. Children in urban settings don't experience that. And a lot of the mental anxiety, now I'll get to the climate change in a minute, but on the ecological crisis, I think we can do a lot by bringing nature into our schools, into our homes. Okay, you get the point. Now, as far as the climate anxiety, that's more complicated. And I do talk with my students about those things. For example, I had a student in the previous class that I taught about religion and environment when he said, I'm not going to marry and I'm not going to have children because I don't want them to come into this world. I don't want children to come into this world that has basically no future. And I was actually shocked when he said that. And we had an interesting discussion in class about that issue. And people debated with him about that position. But all we can do is to listen to them. How many people actually listen to their young adults or to teenagers? I have a standing position against technology, but our technologically saturated life is part of the anxiety. The fact that those kids live away from nature, but into their cell phones all the time, and into their, you see where I'm going with it, is part of the mental illness.
Yeah, just to follow.
Betsy, do you think this is the kind of thing that
So that
happened
was-
to kids in the 60s when they had to worry about nuclear devastation?
So I missed the beginning. Say your question from the
I
beginning.
was just asking, I really was aiming it at Betsy because she's more experience and knowledge about this, but it sounds like something that the kids in the 1960s and 50s would have gone through, worried that their whole world was going to blow up in a nuclear holocaust.
I think there were fears about that. I wasn't, a practice therapist at that point, so I don't know, but exactly what the concerns. I think children were protected in a different way than they are today because of the rise of social media and the access to instant news all the time and the inability to escape from it. But I just wanted to make one final point, and that had to do with, you talked about Judaism offering hope. That's part of our tradition, and it's part of the idea that we do have free will and the ability to make changes. And I think that for some of our young people and for ourselves as well, that is a very important subway strap to hold on to. We are not allowed, even in the face of, failure or potential failure, we are told we're not free to, to abstain from trying. And I have great hope that if you look at the history of the world, there are many problems, but there are many advances. Overall, we are in many ways a healthier world. There's less poverty. It's hard to believe sometimes, but these are true facts if you look back through history. So I think helping kids see that there is hope, and kids are very focused. They don't know history, and they only know their own immediate experience. They haven't had they're not resilient yet, because they think the way they feel now is the way it's always going to be. And it's our job to give them those subway straps that we understand how you feel, but that's not the beginning and end. There is more. And that hope in Judaism, I think, is critical. It's really critical.
But let's go, in a sense, the person who is most hopeful is the one who, a farmer has to be a very hopeful person. Okay, because if you're tied, you put something in the ground, you don't know what's going to happen, right? You don't know what's going to happen to the crop. You have to hope. So I think that if our children grow up with greater, deeper more authentic connection to the natural world, we can reduce a lot of the anxiety, the alienation, the disintegration, the fragmentation. You can go on and on. We can really help them. But because they live in urban deserts, a lot of it's spiritual desert, it's psychological desert, it's relational desert. You can make a long list. And that's why we have those mental illnesses all over the place. So I feel for our young students, I really do. But I think that we as educators can help them. And they don't get the help from their parents because their parents are struggling with the same problem, right? That they're struggling with. So it's very difficult. But I'm a great believer in connection. Being connected to the earth, I think, is a way to be healthier. And we're losing it, or we have lost it maybe, but we can bring it back.
Okay, I have a question that's really well off target, but you said something earlier about Art Waskow. I mean, he's in his 90s. Is he ill, or are you just saying he's?
Oh no, he's quite ill. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, he's not. If you just Google him and you'll see what he looks today. Doesn't look nearly as nice as the pictures that I shared with you. No, he's not in good shape physically. So
Okay.
more details I don't know, but
All right. Okay.
he looks very, very frail. The more recent pictures.
Okay.
So
Well,
yes.
thank you very, very much. It's 2 hours later by you, right? So we should let you go.
My very
Wonderful.
pleasure. You've got your
Thank you
work
so
cut
much.
out for you as the rabbi of this congregation. You can do so much, right? In terms of environmental activism and in terms of, I mean, it's endless. And what pains me, I have to say, I go and I talk to this chavurah and to this synagogue and to this group or whatever. I don't know what happens after I talk. So it's kind of, okay, what do people do? But I had a chavurah here in Scottsdale, and a lot of people who were very well connected and they knew nothing about this. Nobody ever talked to them about Judaism and the environment. And I said, how is it possible? So those two worlds seemed like everything I said was news to them. So we need to get to a point in which I believe that the rabbis across the denominational divide or the denominational plurality, rabbis should bring that environmental message to the congregants. That's the job, I think. And I'm very happy that the CCR published the book. And I told the woman, I said, why don't you send the book to all the rabbis? And said, no, they have to buy the books. No, send it to them. So the Sacred Earth, every rabbi should have, every Jew should have that book.
Maybe you can get a grant for the CCIR so they can do that. They're so good with getting grants. So anyway, let's say goodnight. Laila Tov, Toda Rabah.
And my very pleasure. You take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Good night,
My
everybody.
pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.